You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Welcome to the Christ and Classics podcast, where we attempt to read the classics or consider the classics in light of the Christ. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Holly Ordway, all the way from Oxford, England. Dr. Ordway is, I'm just going to read straight from her website, is the Cardinal Francis George Professor of Faith and Culture at the Word on Fire Institute and visiting professor of apologetics at Houston Christian University. She holds a PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and is a subject editor for the Journal of Inklings Studies. Her book, Tolkien's Modern Reading, Middle Earth Beyond the Middle Ages, Word on Fire, 2021, received the 2022 Mythopoeic Society Scholarship Award in Inkling Studies. She's written numerous books on Tolkien, literature, apologetics, faith, and I wasn't aware. I was looking through. You have what looks like a 2014 publication of an autobiography of your journey into the Christian faith and eventually the Catholic Church. I wasn't aware, and that within the last 5 minutes has. I want to buy it. So
right. There you go. And that's the bookends, because you found that one, but you neglected to mention my most recent book, Tolkien's Faith, a spiritual biography, which is
yes,
just come out now, a year and a half ago. Time does fly.
Right. Yeah, Tolkien's Faith, a spiritual biography in 2023. Very, very happy to have you on, Dr. Ordway, and really, this little podcast is just an avenue of wholesome discussion over great books. It's really that. It's just 45 minutes to an hour of discussing wonderful books throughout the ages, and our topic of discussion today is Tolkien's The Hobbit. Now, a little bit about me. I am a how should I say it? I'm kind of a backdoor literature instructor. I'm currently in a doctoral program in biblical studies, and I teach English literature full time to middle school students, so 12 and 13-year-olds, and we read lots of great material. We just finished Romeo and Juliet. We've read some Orwell and others, and we are halfway through The Hobbit. So you and I having this discussion comes at a really great time in their own journey with Tolkien as well, because I will probably see if they will watch this little conversation that you and I will be having. So before we get started with an initial question, which could take us anywhere, really, I'd like to personally know, what is your background with Tolkien? I guess two questions. When did you first come in contact with Tolkien? And two, how has his literature and life impacted you in a personal way? Obviously, that in an academic way is really obvious. What about in a personal way? So those two questions.
This is a lot of good things to talk about. So for the first question, I really can't remember a time that I didn't know Tolkien's work, which is kind of funny. I read first The Hobbit when I was a little girl, and I think it was probably when I was about 7. I think that's probably about the age that I read it. And I know that I read it before I read Lord of the Rings, because I have a recollection of being disappointed at first in Lord of the Rings. I wanted more Frodo. Who is this Bilbo guy? Sorry, the other way around. I wanted more Bilbo. Who is this Frodo guy? But then I got over it, and I enjoyed that. And actually, like your students, I read The Hobbit in middle school, about that age, but I had already read it on my own. So that was already a revisiting of it. And this is obviously long before the films came out.
Of course.
So I've really had Tolkien as part of my kind of imaginative furniture for my whole life, as far as I recall, my whole life as a reader, certainly, along with C.S. Lewis and the Narnia Chronicles. And then as I got older, reading more of his things, I became interested in high school in fantasy as a kind of a literary genre. And I still vividly remember I picked up a copy of the paperback Tolkien Reader. It's still in print, which has his essay on fairy stories in it, and it has Leaf by Nickel. And I still own that copy. It's beat to death, and the cover has fallen off. And it has like a really trippy 1970s cover on it. 25 cents, excellent purchase. And I remember being really struck by on fairy stories, and this starts to get into your second question of the personal impact. Because for one thing, I was not raised Christian. As you know, I'm an adult convert to Christianity. I was not raised anti-Christian. I was just raised sort of nothing in particular. So I was really as unfamiliar with the Christian story as it is possible for a person to be in, the 20th century. And Tolkien and Lewis and their imaginative works were really the first place that I was engaging with sort of what that meant. Now, I had no idea. Honestly, I was probably the only child in America who did not know that Aslan was Jesus. I mean, I really didn't. Completely did
Oh,
not.
wow.
Yeah, no idea. Because I was completely unchurched. So when there was the bit with Don Treader where Aslan serves them fish and then turns into a lamb, I thought, well, that's weird. But okay, weird things happen in Narnia, I guess. No, I had no idea. Literally.
And even like the thorn in the paw, the thorn in the paw and the silver chair, the
Nothing.
resurrection. Oh, wow.
I had literally no context for that.
Interesting.
You can't recognize something if you've got no context. It was not until I was in my 20s that I realized what he was doing. And then I went through a phase of being really angry with C.S. Lewis. Like, how dare he shove that Christian stuff into my beloved Narnia Chronicles? And then I got over it because I realized he wasn't, in fact, shoving it at me. It was just part of it. And that was part of the longer journey of thinking, oh, what's going on with this? And that's where Tolkien also played a role, because the Lord of the Rings is deeply Christian, but not in an overt way. So what I was doing was engaging with ideas about good and evil and beauty and meaning without realizing it and finding it profoundly attractive. So when I got to the point in my adult life where I started wrestling with questions of meaning, and then starting to reckon with, well, these authors that I love so much have a worldview that is totally different from mine. Because at that point, I was actually writing my doctorate in fantasy and studying Lewis and Tolkien, being myself at that point a convinced atheist. And here are my favorite writers, were these deeply Christian writers. And I loved them. I loved their work, and I found it beautiful and meaningful. And that eventually was a really important factor in me sort of grudgingly saying, well, I don't believe this silly nonsense, but maybe it's not quite as silly because these brilliant authors believe it. So I don't believe it. I don't want to believe it, but at least let me find out what it's really about so I can understand my favorite authors better, mind you, not so I could believe it. And it was really Lewis and Tolkien, their artistic integrity and their brilliance, that made me take their faith more seriously, because dismissing Christianity as utterly stupid and meaningless drivel was inconsistent with who these men were as thinkers and writers. And then, of course, I began to discover, oh, good Lord, this is actually true. I'm in for it now. So they had really, both Tolkien and Lewis, a really powerful impact on bringing me, into the faith. Interestingly, Tolkien also had a profound impact on my future career in a different way, which is coming back to me being a teenager reading On Fairy Stories. The On Fairy Stories is a marvelous essay, and the epilogue of that essay is in fact the first place that I encounter the gospel, because that's where he talks about the fairy stories as being, um, that they have that same lifting of the heart, the good catastrophe, the eucatastrophe, as you
Uh-huh.
find in the Gospels. And he says that the resurrection of Christ is the eucatastrophe, of Christ's incarnation. And keep in mind that I did not know the Christian story apart from like things I heard on television or very random references. This was this was genuinely the first time I had presented to
Wow.
me the idea that there's this story of Christ's death and resurrection, which I knew about, and that it was both a powerful story and he says something that happened in history, and that really moved me. Thinking back now, 35 years, I still remember how moved I was. Now, I didn't understand why it moved me. It did not bring me to read the Gospels. There was no Bible in the house, and I didn't go out and get one.
Mm-hmm.
But something was moved by that, the power of that statement in the epilogue of On Fairy Stories. But independently of that, that essay also was the first time that I saw the work of a real literary critic. Because what I had been, the typical thing in your high school classes, well, let's find all the symbols in Macbeth. Oh, like you could go on a hunting expedition. Bam, I got one. What's your bag?
Yes.
And
Yep.
it's just,
Yep.
I mean, I was actually quite fortunate in that I had overall pretty good teaching in my English classes in high school. But even so, it was not the kind of thing that made me want to do literary criticism. It's like, oh, here we're doing
Right.
stuff to these stories. I love the stories. I don't want to talk about them that way.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
Fairy Stories showed me Tolkien, who could write these great stories, could also talk about how they worked in a way that made me enjoy them more rather than
Yeah.
less. And that was a real light bulb. And
Yeah.
it didn't take effect immediately because at the time I wanted to be a veterinarian. And that didn't pan out. But eventually I changed my major in college to being English. And I do really think that it was Tolkien who gave me the vision of what I do now. And I try to do that. I'm a literary critic, a literary biographer. And my aim is to do what he did, in a sense, to look at literature, but to look at it through the lens of love, to say, I'm going to explore this because I love it, because it's meaningful, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to understand it better. And good literary criticism should enliven and enhance your appreciation, not kill it. And there's a lot of really bad literary criticism that does that. And so that's really shaped my life. Tolkien really has shaped my life in those two really quite profound ways.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you. Your thoughts on literary criticism remind me of the first time I read the essay some years ago. I'm still fairly young. I'm only 31. Um, um, but early on in seminary, I read it and found it marvelous. Later on, I read Lewis's An Experiment in Criticism, and I think that work is really, as you said, showed me that Lewis can speak in a more technical sense, but in a way that, as you said, enlivens and deepens my interest and love for the works that I'm reading.
Mm.
It's interesting that you and I are having this conversation today because we just took a trip to Minnesota, and we drove up north, had a whole lot of fun in the snow, and drove back. And I had my copy of The Hobbit, and we had several other books in the car for the kids to read. And my daughter, who is 7, just picked up my copy because I've been telling them about the story, because I said, hey, once we finish, we're reading the Harry Potter series right now, and which is a lot better than I anticipated it being. And I said, after we finish this and we finish Narnia, which we're almost done with as well, we'll start reading out loud The Hobbit and Journey Through Middle Earth. And then she just yesterday on the 8-hour drive back began picking up and read a dozen or so pages. And I think after this episode, I'm gonna go to the local bookstore and get her and my son a cheap copy of the set, and they can get a head start on it.
Good, good
So
thinking. Yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, Hobbit, and we'll talk more about that shortly, I'm sure. But there are levels and levels. You can read it as a 7-year-old, then you get more out
yeah,
of it. Read it again and again. But before we get off the topic of good literary criticism, since we've also been kind of talking about Lewis and Tolkien in
yep,
parallel, do you know Michael Ward's book Planet Narnia?
yeah. We actually Michael Ward was actually the second guest we had on this show, and we discussed his Planet Narnia as well. This was
Well,
about a year ago.
you have excellent taste because that's a brilliant book, and I highly
Oh
commend it to
yes,
all of your audience. And he really does what I'm trying to do, you know, exceptionally well. He, brings out the meaning of the Narnia Chronicles so that you enjoy them more. I mean, it's brilliant insights. It's, I think, absolutely spot on. It's utterly convincing and backed up, and then it enhances your reading of it. So
yeah. That's what I felt as well. I felt like, I guess, to use the frame of Lewis's looking along a text and looking at a text, I felt like that book did a great job of kind of meshing together and like the two embracing. You're looking at it, but yet like it makes you want to get back into the book itself.
And then when you do, you get more out of it. Like your eyes are open wide
Yes,
to take in that looking along. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a
yeah,
very good analogy for what he accomplishes in that book.
yeah, wonderful. This is wonderful. Um, okay, here's my question regarding The Hobbit. How does like well, how does the identity of like hobbit-ness, being a hobbit in general, shape heroism throughout The Hobbit? And then the second question we could get to is how does Bilbo's particular heroism relate to other literary heroes before and even contemporary with Tolkien, and maybe even beyond too. Let's just talk about the first one though. How does the identity of hobbitness in general shape heroism as the story unfolds?
This is a great question, and since you gave me a heads up that you're going to ask this question on the show, it made me pull up an appropriate quote because when I was writing my new biography, Tolkien's Faith, I ended up exploring that connection quite a bit. And it turns out that there's a lot going on there, and it has to do with humility. So let me read you a
Yeah.
quote this is from Tolkien's letters. So in one letter, he said that the Lord of the Rings, this is not the Hobbit, but we have the hobbits in it.
Hmm.
Lord of the Rings was planned to be hobbitocentric, that is primarily a study of the ennoblement or sanctification of the humble. So there you have, he's really putting a high value on the humble. But with regard to your question about heroism, he says that he saw the value of hobbits in putting earth under the feet of romance and in providing subjects for ennoblement and heroes more praiseworthy than the professionals. He says,
Mm.
I would not be a hero is, of course, as good a start for a hero as I would not be a bishop for a bishop. And of course, he's referring to the tradition in the Catholic Church that that the bishop is supposed to say, no, 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 I don't want to be a bishop before they make him a bishop.
Hmm.
Nolo are. He says, Nolo heroizare is as good a start for a hero as I would not be bishop for a bishop. And then he says, we are all equal before the great author. And then he quotes the Magnificat from St. Luke's Gospel, who puts down the mighty from their seat and exalts the humble. So I think this is Tolkien directly speaking to your question. What is it about the hobbits that make them good heroes? And it is precisely they are better heroes than the professional heroes, precisely
Yeah.
because they start out by saying, I don't want to be a hero. And that's exactly what we get with Bilbo
Yeah.
Baggins. He does not want to be a hero.
No. No. He's very, very uh, not just reluctant. He is just opposed to any sort of lifestyle that would necessitate a hero even being necessary. The quote that you just quoted reminds me of, I think it's Prince Caspian. I think it's Caspian. No. Is it Caspian? Where he's talking to the lion. Somebody in Narnia is talking to the lion. They're about to be exalted, and the lion says, "Are you ready?" And he says something like, "No, I'm not ready." Well, the fact that you answered that way, it proves that you are ready for this. I think it might have been Peter or
That
Caspian.
sounds right. I would have to look it up. I have my head full of
Yes.
now. So, but yes, it
Yep.
definitely
No.
that passage.
Yes. So, yes, right off the bat, Tolkien's very clear to say that hobbits in general are homebodies. They love an easy life. They do not like adventure. They love simple pleasures of smoking and eating and gardening and visitors when invited, of course. But he's also very clear that Bilbo's not an ordinary hobbit with his genealogy. He's got some took in him, and that drives him forward and piques his interest as he goes along. And so this little unexpected figure is called by a family friend, a wizard, a very important wizard, and he I when I first read The Hobbit, I thought, wow, okay, this little guy doesn't want to go on a journey. He likes the home. But he ends up getting so flustered with the dwarves in his home, and he wants to prove himself that he really does want to go. And he ends up at nearly every single turn becoming the hero. With the trolls, he's thrown into that, and Gandalf saves them. He succeeds with Gollum. The eagles save them from the wargs and the goblins. And then really when they enter Mirkwood, he really, I think, unless I've overlooked something, he seems to show his true, like, this is his first real challenge where he saves them all single-handedly, the dwarves from the spiders. And the dwarves respect him for that. Even the dwarves at the very beginning are very hesitant and questioning Gandalf's decision. Why have you? Is this the guy that this is the burglar that you've chosen for us?
And quite understandably so. He's doesn't a particularly impressive figure in those early scenes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and one of the neat things about it is that you're seeing Tolkien giving us the growth of this character. You know, that he's being given these challenges and then he rises to them. So it's not an instant thing that, you know, just add adventure and you get a hero. No, he's really showing the way that he gradually becomes, you know, he stretches, grows. And that I think is very realistic. You know, and this is one of the things I think people can sometimes jump to an unwarranted conclusion that fantasy is not realistic because it takes place in a world that has things that don't exist. But quite the contrary. And in fact, it's C.S. Lewis who made the point in one of his letters that in fact that the laws of fantasy are just absolutely strict. You know, it's not that anything can happen. And then we have the same thing here. You know, we may have hobbits and dwarves and trolls and whatnot, but we have a very realistic development of his character as he takes on these things and realizes that he can do them, and gets, you know, stronger as he goes. And I like too the way that Tolkien really emphasizes the internal aspect of being a hero, because you get, I mean, he fights the spiders and that's heroic, in a sort of outward way. But when we get towards the end of the book, you know, when they've encountered Smaug and they send Bilbo down the tunnel, and there's that really interesting passage where he gets partway down and he's aware that there's the dragon at the other end, and he pauses for a long time in the tunnel before he goes on. And Tolkien says something to the effect of, this was the most courageous thing that he ever did.
Yeah.
And no one would ever know about it because it was just him sitting in the dark deciding to go on. And I think that's very, very insightful, that the real test of courage is not necessarily what you do when you have the adrenaline running and the spiders are attacking and the sword's in your hand. It's what do you do in a cold moment when you're just scared and there's a scary thing ahead, and you just choose to go on. And that was the hardest thing that Bilbo did in terms of his bravery. It's very, very insightful.
I think also a moment like that could really resonate with a child. There are growing up. I would assume most children have instances where they're alone and they're afraid of the dark, maybe in a corner of their house, or their parents ask them to go outside, especially if you live in a more rural setting and there's not a whole lot of streetlights around. Hey, can you go outside and take the trash out and it's really dark and you're the only one there? Somebody like Bilbo can really encourage you in that moment. And so um, it's so hobbit-ness, little smallness, a lack of physical strength, a timidness, at least demonstrated at the beginning, all make for a recipe that we would ordinarily think not hero. We wouldn't equivocate that with hero, but Tolkien has chosen this figure to be the hero, or this race to be the hero. Something that as I've reread it this semester with my students, I've thought about Gollum's role in all of this as well, because and his identity and his role with the ring, and as it relates to Bilbo's success and his aid to the company. Without Gollum and his moral and physical disintegration because of the ring, then a lot of that Bilbo accomplished, whether outwardly or like even that, which led to his more internal heroic moments, couldn't have happened without that. And even as we think further along into the Lord of the Rings, Gollum plays a very ironic role, a critical role in the restoration of the world, really. And how does Gollum's role in The Hobbit? It's a genuine question. How does Gollum's role in The Hobbit relate directly to Bilbo's role as a hero?
Well, I think here, this is one of the places where we're tapping into Tolkien's Christian faith. Not explicitly, because everything he's doing here is implicit. But really, it's the working of providence. Because Gollum is murderous. He's corrupt. He's not heroic. He has been corrupted by the ring. He does evil things. We see this. But and then we have the ring itself, which we learn more in the Lord of the Rings, is itself evil, and it wants to be found so that it can then return to its master and dominate Middle Earth. And of course, Bilbo then becomes the way in which it makes its way out of the caves. So in that sense, this is in a way the workings of evil. But here we see, this idea of providence, of God working all things for good for those who love him. So Bilbo gets the ring, and we learn later, and of course this is a retcon that Tolkien puts into The Hobbit. When Bilbo gets the ring and he's escaping, there's a moment at which he has the possibility that he could kill Gollum and make his escape. Right. And the key thing is that in one way of thinking, this is the right move. Gollum is evil. Gollum wants to kill him. It would be much more secure and likely that he'll escape if he does that. But Bilbo doesn't do that. He has a moment that he feels pity. He feels pity for the wretchedness of Gollum, despite the fact that Gollum is evil and wants to kill him and all that. He pities him. And so he chooses not to kill him and he risks leaping over him. He escapes. And we learn later in The Lord of the Rings, as Gandalf says, that it was because of that mercy and pity, because that was how Bilbo first got the ring, that is why the ring did not corrupt him the way it corrupted Gollum. And he's able to pass it on. And
Yeah.
providentially, that's also why Gollum is able to be present at the climactic scene, because of that action of mercy and pity, which is not a worldly wise decision. In the eyes of the world, like, this is just kind of foolish. Just kill your enemy, get him out of the way. But it's the right decision. And that's morally what makes Bilbo a hero in that moment, is that he chooses not to do the violent deed. He chooses to exercise pity, and that's the sort of moral heroism. And we
Yeah.
see that later on as well. We can talk about the Arkenstone, but I think that's a really central part of Tolkien's idea about what it means to be a hero.
Yeah. No, that's great. As my daughter yesterday was reading, it struck me. I had never made this connection before, but the very famous opening of chapter 1, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. And I just thought, oh, there's an antithesis here. In a hole in the ground there lived a Gollum, and he lived in a nasty, a dirty, and a wet hole. It was probably filled with the ends of worms down in the mountain, and it had lots of oozy smells. And I just thought, man, I don't know if I'm making these connections artificially or if they're intended, but it does very much seem that Gollum and his home, as it were, is the very antithesis of a hobbit and a hero. Even in their stature and their similarities and their backgrounds. Even it says in chapter 5 that Tolkien writes that oh gosh, I don't know something to the effect of that Gollum lived with his grandmother and he had lots of friends when he was younger, as he lived in his hole. And I was like, oh, Gollum lived in a hole as well. Who else lived in a hole? Well, hobbits live in a hole. And his character is expanded in the Lord of the Rings, and he seems to be the very opposite of what you would expect from a hobbit, and especially Bilbo and Frodo. And then ironically, he's the one who does the job that Frodo was tasked and could not do on his own.
And I think that's really, it's an important point, because we do know that Gollum is of a race somewhat like the hobbits at any rate. He's hobbit-like, even if he isn't exactly a hobbit. And so we're kind of seeing two moral trajectories, because, when Gollum finds the ring, Smeagol as he was then, he murders his friend to get it. And then he uses it, to spy on things. And how he starts out with a crime. He murders his best friend to keep the ring. And we have action after action where Gollum is choosing the evil, and he ends up. It's a case study. This is what sin does to you. That he ends up miserable in this oozy, nasty hole, strangling little orcs and eating raw fish. And there's this moment, and of course Bilbo is given moral choices. What will he do? Will he kill Gollum? Will he go down the same path? No, he diverges, right? And that divergence then, he hands it on to Frodo, and Frodo likewise makes these choices. Frodo has the opportunity to kill Gollum and doesn't, again, out of mercy and pity. So he's continuing on that path. And you see there's just such a heartbreaking scene in The Lord of the Rings where you actually get a glimpse briefly of Gollum as Smeagol again, the withered ancient hobbit who's just burdened by the years. And there's this moment where you think he could turn away, could choose the good. Even though he's been on the path of evil for centuries, it seems, probably, he still could choose it, but he doesn't. And Sam, snaps at him, and that breaks the moment. But it's not just Sam's fault. It's because Gollum has, by his choices, put himself in a condition where it is harder and harder and harder to choose the good. And that is a really convicting, I think, moral insight, that we can't just say, "Oh, it doesn't matter that I do the small lie, the small injustice, the this
Mhm.
and that. When it comes to the really big choices, then I'll finally choose the good." Well, or not. If we continue to do the small lie, the small injustice, the turning away from the truth, maybe we're going to get ourselves to a place where we can't turn, even if we kind of want to. We might even not really want to anymore. So there's really a very significant moral challenge being offered to us in this sort of comparison of Gollum with Bilbo and Frodo.
Yeah, in terms of the New Testament, the Gollum's conscience appears to be seared, closed off.
Hmm.
Um, e- Except not all the way, it seems, as you were mentioning, because as a reader, you really begin to pity Gollum in those moments. I know we're jumping out of the Hobbit here, but like you begin to pity him with Frodo,
Hmm.
but yet still you don't trust him because you know how far down this road he has taken himself. Um, and in Aristotle's Ethics, he says something similar. I forget exactly where, but something to the effect of um, just men become just by doing justly, by acting justly, and wicked men become wicked by acting wickedly. Your decisions change you and make you become what you do.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we see that aptly in Gollum, and even in Bilbo and Frodo. Bilbo and Frodo were not as they were at the beginning of the story.
Yeah. I mean, even coming back to just The Hobbit, which does not have quite the moral intensity of The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is an adult novel, and it takes these same themes and it heightens them, it enriches them. But you can see it in a sort of smaller scale in The Hobbit, which also itself has this arc of becoming more serious. Because at the outset, the dwarves want to get their gold back, the
Yeah.
treasure back. Okay, fine. But then they get it, and Thorin and the others, but especially Thorin, get infected by the dragon sickness. They
Uh
and
huh.
and they become attached to that, so much so that they're willing to go to war against the lake men and the elves just to keep their gold. And even though the dragon has been ravaging the land, Thorin is not willing to part with any of it. Masses of gold, a nice pile of it, but he doesn't want to part with any of it to the people who are needy because it's
Yeah.
all his. Does he have a claim on it? Yes, he does. Does he have a moral claim to all of it, excluding the needy? No. That's
No.
the moral statement that Tolkien is making. Like, no, those people do have a moral claim on at least a portion of that treasure. But Thorin, his heart is beginning to be hardened, and
Uh
he's
huh.
willing to get into war over it and have more death. And Bilbo, he has been walking the path of humility. He's the hobbit. He's little. He's not important, and his humility allows him to sort of see this more clearly. So he takes the Arkenstone, and
Uh
he knows that this is not going to.
huh.
And he goes and he knows this is the one part of the treasure that Thorin values above all the
Oh yeah.
rest. And so he sneaks out and he brings it to the elves and the lake men and says, "Here you go, use this to negotiate so that you can not have war." And the thing about this is that he is thereby giving up everything that he could have, as far as he knows, everything that he could gain. Because he says, "Well, I'm claiming this as my share of the treasure." And he knows it's a little bit sort of legalistic, but okay. But Thorin then says, "Well, then that's your share. You choose to give it away. Nothing else for you, and I cut you off." And so he loses the friendship of the dwarves as far as he knows, and he loses all of his money, and he's stranded in a strange land. But he has done what he knows, and we know to be the right thing. He's given up everything he has so there will not be this stupid, pointless war
Yeah.
between the dwarves and the elves and the humans. But here, the interesting thing is, the Thorin and the other dwarves, they're painted differently than Gollum because they've made some bad choices that have led them into, the path of sin, into being possessive, but they haven't gone so far down that they can't repent. And
Right.
Thorin does. And there's that just such a moving scene at the end. It's just so powerful where Thorin is dying. They've
Yeah.
come together. They've fought the mutual enemies, so they've now had a righteous fight against the goblins and the wargs. And Thorin is wounded unto death, and he's dying. He calls Bilbo to him, and he apologizes, and he wants them to end their friendship, being in friendship. And he calls him, good thief, which of course
Yeah.
is for Tolkien, it's a reference to Christ. For he who
Yeah.
has ears to hear will hear in this story. And it's so powerful because you realize that although Thorin dies, it's a good death. He has not died in hardness of heart. He has not died in bitterness and greed. He has realized that he has done wrong. He has done everything then in his power to set it right. He's reconciled with Bilbo. So here we have a sense of he's now in his own way heroic in a different way because he's reckoned with what he's done wrong. He's repented and turned back to the right way. And it's
Mhm.
such a beautiful scene. It makes me choke every
Yeah.
time.
And so by the end of it, our attention as readers is on this little obscure figure who has not just demonstrated a physical heroism in literally saving them from deaths and captivity in Mirkwood, and even even talking with Smog and a little thrush here, listening to give Dale insight into Smog's only weakness when he's shot down, but a moral heroism with integrity and selflessness and a desire for peace and goodness that is gripping. It's gripping. It's easy, especially for children, I think, to become mesmerized by the strength and the flashes of the sword and the magic of the ring and the secret quietness and the escape from the Elven King's palace, and it's all really wonderful and fun and necessary. But at a deeper level, I think Bilbo shows us, as you've mentioned, what it means to be a flourishing human. It's to be exalted from your humble state, and unexpectedly so, and even a bit unwillingly so, or reluctantly so, because you recognize your limitations. And that's beautiful. That's why I love Bilbo, and this is probably why most people love Bilbo and the Hobbit so much. It's because it's so opposite of what you would expect, and that's the point. That's the point of God coming in the flesh to just reverse all the presuppositions and expectations of the world.
And one of the neat things that Tolkien's really subverting those expectations in a way that we might bring to a story. Like, so Bilbo, he goes in this adventure, and he does all these great things. And in a more conventional story, you might expect him to then become, that he's set up as a king. He's now king of the hobbits or something like that. But no, he comes back. He comes back home, and he's just Mr. Baggins. And he becomes like kind of like Mr. Baggins, who, well, he has really good parties. And enjoys his wealth, but he doesn't. He enjoys his wealth, but he doesn't use it to lord over people. I think that
Yeah.
again is another aspect of it, because we all have different resources. What do we do with it? He isn't saying that it's wrong for Bilbo to be wealthy, but Bilbo uses that wealth in a way that is fitting to his station. But he's just Mr. Baggins. And I just think that's delightful because the
Yeah.
humble have been exalted, as he says, and this is an echo again of Mary in the Gospels, but exalted in the moral and spiritual sense, not just outwardly. It's not that Bilbo is then given this great power. He actually doesn't. He doesn't have any more power at the end of the story than he had at the beginning. He just has more friends and, adventures. And I think that again, just
Yeah. I have a question. I haven't thought about it really until just now, but it's related. So Gandalf calls Bilbo on this journey, and he shows up and is a hero throughout, guiding them, saving them when needed, and then leaving them, and then coming back really quickly. And you see something similar happening throughout the Lord of the Rings. He's guiding them now, knowing that Gandalf wears one of the rings, and knowing that he's one of the lesser Ainur, holy ones, if you will. Yeah. Could Tolkien be doing something similar with Gandalf that he's doing with Bilbo? Like he's one of the lesser that's being one of the grand orchestrators and leaders of this whole offensive against the dark forces of Sauron. Like, why didn't Tolkien choose one of the greater, more powerful of the Valar to lead and guide? Is he doing something similar where he's exalting a lowly state?
That's an interesting question. I wouldn't say he's doing quite the same thing because Gandalf is not in a lowly state in the same way at all because he's very
Right.
highly esteemed. He's a noble. He's a counselor. He's also a great warrior. So there's a lot about Gandalf that really makes him stand out. That he's not low and humble. He is one of the greats in Middle Earth. Although he,
Mm-hmm.
in the larger scheme of things, is he the most powerful figure? No. So I don't think he's doing. I think it's really with the hobbits that Tolkien's exploring that theme of
Yep.
humility. But I do think that you're right that there's some sense of the even the limitations of power, because Gandalf is one of the greats, but when he reflects on could he take the ring, he says no, because he says to Frodo, if I were to take it, I would become a worse tyrant than Sauron because I would start
Yep.
out wanting to use this total power for good. And in the end, I would become,
Yeah.
just a tyrant. So even Gandalf, part of Gandalf's wisdom, and maybe this is getting to the theme of wisdom rather than humility.
Yep.
Gandalf has the wisdom to know his own limits, to say, I have been given certain power, certain gifts, certain authority, but I know the limits and I know that I can't go past those limits.
Mm-hmm.
And wisdom is in knowing when to say no. Where, for instance, Saruman, who's also, in the Order of Wizards, Saruman does not have that wisdom. He wants more knowledge and more and more and
Mm-hmm.
more power, and you see where that takes him. So I think in a way we see if Tolkien's exploring the theme of the virtue of humility in the Hobbits, we might say that he's exploring the virtue of wisdom in Gandalf.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. With just our last 10 or so minutes, uh, how does Bilbo's heroism relate to other literary heroes that preceded The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings? Are there any similar, and if there are, who? And if not, let's talk about it.
Well, I mean that's a big question. There's
Yeah,
lots.
it's super broad, really broad.
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, nothing is really coming to mind off the top of my head. Um, you know, sorry, I'm not much help on this question. My head is full of the hobbits, and I'm not bringing up anything.
No, I just think of like you think of heroes who've gone on long journeys to solve a big problem, and what little reading I've done, heroes like Odysseus and his great journey back home is there are themes of humility woven in, but you still have this grand warrior coming back to defeat the bad guy. Um, you've got Achilles and Hector, just strong outwardly, courageous.
Mindful.
Beowulf, like a warrior there.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the typical narrative literary hero is strong, is all the things that Bilbo isn't. So I think in that sense, the literary tradition is more like if you're going to have a hero go on a quest, he's going to be a mighty hero.
Mm-hmm.
However, in folk tales, which Tolkien also knew well, there is the tradition of the youngest son is the one who manages to solve the problem. If there's seven sons and the first six are bold and
Uh-huh.
brave, seventh, who's like just little Joe at home, he's the one who manages it. So I think there is a folkloric tradition in which the little guy is the one who solves the riddle and achieves it. So I think there is at least a folkloric folktale tradition that Tolkien is, accessing to a certain extent. But what makes it, I think, different is that, The Hobbit is a novel. It's got fully realized characters. We have the
Mm-hmm.
three-dimensionality of it. And that makes it, I think, more distinctive.
Yeah. Yes. The Joseph story is attracting because it's the youngest brother who ends up saving them all in his humility and not and having pity on the ones who wronged him. Similar to Bilbo, and then of course the Christ who comes um,
And of
and
course, Tolkien was, deeply biblically literate, and so he would have known, the Old Testament as well as the New. So yeah, the story of Joseph is a great example of the kind of, in a way, the Hobbit model. Although Joseph does end up
Mhm.
being, a very big shot, and
Mhm.
so that part of it isn't the same. But the idea of the little guy, or even you have David, who he's chosen to be the king of Israel, even though he's the little boy, he's the one who's off with the sheep. What him, and he's the one who ends up being the anointed one. So that idea of the little one, the forgotten, I mean that image comes up in scripture a lot, and surely that would
Yep.
have part of the imaginative material with which Tolkien's imagination was fed to come up with a figure like Bilbo.
And it's we like what's the word? There's a better term than this. I've got it in my mind, but there's a better term for it. The underdog, so to speak. We like that story. We love it when the little guy least expected wins or leads or demonstrates a virtue unexpected. That's why I love The Hobbit. I love The Hobbit also because um well, no, this is more Lord of the Rings. I love the Lord of the Rings because of the hope that it just deeply implants in you as a reader, that necessarily creates a metaphorical image that you can latch onto for your own life. And Bilbo, it's courage and bravery and um, integrity, like courage, bravery, and integrity. That's that. When I read The Hobbit and I think about it and I talk about it, why do I love it? It's like because this Hobbit is courageous when he needs to be. And he's brave, just in the right proportions, and he demonstrates integrity, the likes of which I hope to ever mimic.
Yeah, and and he has he's a good friend. The value
Oh
of
yes,
friendship is a
yes,
principal theme. He's not just hanging out with the dwarves to do a job. He ends up, he loves them. They become his friends. He cares about them. He
right.
weeps when Thorin dies. I mean, this is really powerful. I mean, the importance of friendship, I think, is something that bears a lot
Mm-hmm.
of emphasis in these days when we tend to be so isolated and so atomized. But that beautiful picture of friendship, and even the fact that that he ends with saying, come by any time for tea, if
Yeah.
you're ever in Hobbits. And it's just beautiful. It's like it starts out with the "What are you doing in my life?" and it ends with "Oh, you're
Mhm.
all my friends. Come and visit me." And
Yeah.
that's another reason why it's so appealing. Like I want to be friends with Bilbo. I want to have tea, at Bag End and have all the things he's going to feed me. But I want to hang out with him.
Yeah.
He's someone who's clearly going to be fun to be around, um, and that's beautiful too. And that maybe is one of the things that's so marvelous about it, that we have a character who does demonstrate all of these virtues that we've been talking about, but he's someone that we like, that we want to spend time with. Because there's this, I think, stereotype in the world that oh, it's good to be virtuous, but if you're virtuous, you're probably a prig and a stuffed shirt and you're boring, and it's more fun to be wicked. But actually it's not. That's a lie. Bilbo is extremely fun to be around. And it comes from his integrity, his courage, and his honesty and his humility. And we want to hang out with him. Like, yes, I want to be like that.
Yeah. It very much feels like by the at the beginning of it, at least from an American 12, 13-year-old perspective, it's like the cool guys, like who's and the cool guys show up and they don't like what they see, and then by the end of it, the cool, like, they're all cool together, so to speak. They're all in the popular crowd together
Exactly.
because
And
of what they've been through.
exactly. And it isn't because Bilbo has made himself like them. It's because they have
Right.
recognized the good qualities of Bilbo. It's like the most wholesome imaginable way,
Yeah.
having them all come together. They're all the cool kids because the cool kids have recognized the virtue of Bilbo. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. We're gonna finish The Hobbit in my classes here in the next couple of weeks, and toward the end of it, we're gonna have I have what's called I'm calling it Hobbit Day. It's paired with my Shakespeare Day from last semester, and we're gonna turn my entire classroom into a big dining room with a big long table. We're all gonna dress up. I've got a Gandalf costume and a staff, and we're gonna dress up as hobbits or dwarves or characters, and we're gonna feast. We're gonna have
Oh,
we're gonna have lots of parents are gonna bring food and drink, and just feast together and have students act out and read portions of the Hobbit.
I
So
love
it should be
that.
really
Oh,
fun.
what
I
a
had
perfect
never
way to think.
I never pictured myself like when I originally got my undergraduate degree in music, so I specialized in trumpet. Going to be a musician and a music teacher. And then the Lord brought me to seminary, where I fell in love with Greek and Hebrew and eventually Latin. And I think I want to teach at a university. And then through a variety of steps, I still am working toward that goal. But in the meantime, He's surprised me. The Lord has, with teaching literature and Latin to middle school and high school students. And I've had a blast doing it. The insights that young students could have, and the attention that they give to certain aspects of a story is remarkable, because I'm thinking a lot of times just at a big broad picture, big ideas, and they're thinking like individual little bitty details that often I just don't pick up at this point, you know?
And I just want to commend the work that you're doing, because I mean, as a university professor myself, there needs to be people like you doing this work. I mean, you are, I would say, even more essential than university
Mm.
teachers right now, because this is a place you're getting the students when their hearts and their minds are still open. And the opportunity for you to really profoundly shape them and encourage them towards virtue and towards intellectual curiosity and towards just all these good
Mm.
things, that is sometimes really often a make or break moment in a young person's life. And if you can put them on the right track before they get to college, it's a totally different experience for them and for the university teachers. And
Mm.
honestly, I think that age does not get enough attention. A lot of people, they think about the challenges faced by young adults, and those challenges are severe. But for many of those young people, they wouldn't be facing those challenges if they had been formed properly at age 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
So I just commend you
Yeah.
and your work. And
Mm.
however long you're there, maybe it will be your whole career. And if it is, then God bless you, because that is doing the Lord's work and doing a profound positive thing in the lives of these young people.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Ordway, thanks for coming on and discussing a great book with me. I'd love to continue the conversation with the Fellowship, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King at some point. That would be a delight.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, it was a
So,
pleasure to talk with you. So, and I'm just happy that you recognize this is a great book, because it is. So, very
oh,
good.
absolutely, wonderful. It's one of my favorite. In fact, I didn't say this, but Tolkien's. I consider it Tolkien's grand mythology. The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. I know there are others, but these four in particular, as one unit, have influenced my life more than any other book outside the Holy Scriptures. I can say that with confidence. If I, yeah. So I'm really thankful for what Tolkien has done, and I know I'm one in a million to have similar experiences. So,
Excellent.
well, thank you again, and God bless. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.